My father and I ran a crab boat, the Osprey, out of Dutch Harbor. It's a hard life, but it's an honest one, or so I used to think. The Bering Sea doesn't care if you're honest. It only cares if you're strong and if you're lucky. One season, we were neither. We were on our third day of a 10-day trip, and the pots were coming up light. The mood was grim. It was a weirdly calm day. The sea was a sheet of gray glass, and the sky was the color of a dull nickel. There was no wind. The silence was unnerving, broken only by our engine and the cry of the gulls. It was Dad who spotted it first. Another boat, a crabber like ours, adrift about 2 miles off our starboard side. It was the Mary Ann, a boat out of Akutan. We knew her captain, a guy named Mac. We hailed them on the radio. Nothing. We tried again. Just static. As we got closer, a feeling of deep unease settled over me. There were no lights on, no smoke from the stack, no sign of life at all. The pots were stacked neatly on her deck. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Like a museum exhibit. Dad wanted to call it in and leave it, but I argued. Salvage rights, I said, and we had to check for survivors. It was the law of the sea. Reluctantly, he agreed. We pulled alongside the Mary Ann, and the silence was deafening. The air felt cold, colder than it should have been, and strangely dry. It sucked the moisture right out of your throat. I was the one to board her. The moment my boots hit her deck, I felt it. A profound stillness. It wasn't just quiet, it was the absence of everything. No creak of the hull, no gentle slap of water, no hum of machinery. It was like the boat was encased in a vacuum. I called out, "Ahoy, Mary Ann! Anyone aboard?" My voice sounded thin and dead, absorbed by the oppressive silence. I made my way to the wheelhouse, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the stillness. And that's where I found Mac. He was sitting in his captain's chair, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. He wasn't dead, not in any way I understood. He was desiccated. His skin was like old parchment, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were wide open, milky white, and his mouth was a gaping hole, as if he'd been screaming for an eternity. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. He was just a human husk. On the table next to him was the ship's log. I opened it with a trembling hand. The last week of entries were normal. Weather observations, catch counts, complaints about the engine. But the final 2 entries were different. The second-to-last entry, dated 2 days prior, read, "Pulled pot 42. Something new, not a crab. Looks like a cluster of geodes, but they glow. Brought it into the hold to see what it is. The air feels strange." That was it. The final entry was a single, terrifying sentence scrawled in a shaky, barely legible hand. It said, "It sings the water out of you." I felt a cold dread snake down my spine. The dry air, Mac's condition, it was starting to make a terrible kind of sense. I had to see what was in the hold. I knew it was a stupid idea, the kind of thing the guy in the horror movie does right before he dies, but I had to know. I left the wheelhouse and went to the main hold, the heavy steel hatch battened down tight. My dad was yelling from our boat, telling me to get the hell off of there, but I ignored him. I managed to wrench the hatch open. The air that rushed out was unbelievably cold and so dry it felt like it was burning my lungs. I peered down into the darkness. There, in the center of the hold, was the source. It was a crystalline formation about the size of a large crab pot, a lattice of interlocking geometric shapes that pulsed with a soft, internal blue light. It wasn't a geode. It looked more like something grown than something formed. A low, continuous hum emanated from it, a sound that was on the very edge of hearing. As I stared, mesmerized by the light, I noticed the frost, not just on the walls of the hold, but forming in midair, tiny ice crystals precipitating out of nothing and drifting down like snow. It was sucking the moisture out of the atmosphere. It sings the water out of you. I finally understood. This thing, this impossible creature or mineral or whatever it was,
It didn't eat flesh. It consumed water. It had boiled Mac dry from the inside out, slowly and silently. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt its pull. The humming seemed to be getting into my head, and I felt a sudden, agonizing thirst, a craving for water so intense it was painful. My tongue felt like sandpaper in my mouth. My own boat, just yards away, seemed to ripple and distort, a mirage in a desert. I imagined diving into the ocean, the cold water rushing into my lungs just to quench this terrible, all-consuming thirst. The creature was luring me in with my own most basic biological need. I saw phantoms of waterfalls and cool, clear springs dancing at the edge of my vision. It was a hallucination born of a physical attack, a slow, agonizing dehydration. I was stumbling, my knees weak, my mind clouded by the single thought of water. I was losing myself to the thing in the hold, just as Mac did. It was my father who saved me. He saw me staggering on the deck, and without a second thought, he jumped across to the Marianne. He grabbed me by the collar and dragged me, kicking and delirious, back toward our boat. The moment I was off the cursed ship, the intense thirst subsided to a manageable level, and the hallucinations vanished. The sound of the world rushed back. We didn't wait. Dad cut the lines tying us to the Marianne, and we pushed off, full throttle. We never looked back. We let her drift, a silent tomb for her captain and a prison for the thing in her hold. We reported her as a ghost ship, said the crew was missing, never mentioning what we'd found. Who would believe us? They'd call us crazy or worse, accuse us of something. I sold my share of the boat to my dad and never set foot on a fishing vessel again. I live in Arizona now. I like the desert. The dryness feels honest here. But even 1,000 miles from the ocean, I'm never truly free. I suffer from a chronic, unquenchable thirst. I drink gallons of water a day, but I always feel dehydrated, as if something is still slowly, patiently drawing the moisture out of my...
I'm what they call a deep water trawler. My name's Leo, and I worked on the Titan, a rust bucket of a ship that dragged nets along the ocean floor, miles deep, off the coast of Alaska. It's a brutal, unforgiving job. The pressure at those depths is enough to crush a submarine like a beer can, and the things that live down there are from a world without sun, a world of nightmares. We were working over the Aleutian Trench, a place where the seabed drops off into black nothingness. The crew was jumpy. A month before, a Russian fishing vessel, the Volkov, had vanished in this same sector. No distress call, no wreckage, no oil slick, just gone. We tried not to think about it, focusing on the job, the rhythmic clang and groan of the hydraulics as we lowered the massive trawl net into the abyss. The water is so cold down there it can freeze your blood, and the darkness is so complete it feels like a physical weight. You feel it in your bones, the sheer, crushing tonnage of the ocean above the things you're trying to catch. The first sign that something was wrong was the winch. It was pulling a load heavier than anything our captain, a hard-as-nails man named Riggs, had ever seen. The motor was screaming, and the steel cable, thick as my arm, was stretched taut enough to sing. Riggs was giddy, thinking we'd snagged a whole colony of giant spider crabs or a lost shipping container full of treasure. We all gathered on the deck, the freezing spray hitting our faces, as the net was slowly, painstakingly dragged up from the depths. It took over 3 hours. As it neared the surface, a strange bioluminescence illuminated the water around it, a sickly, pulsing green and violet light. Then the smell hit us. It wasn't the familiar reek of fish and brine. It was the smell of ozone, like right after a lightning strike, mixed with something acrid and coppery like old blood. It was a chemical, alien smell that made our eyes water and our stomachs turn. The excitement on the deck died instantly, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. When the net finally broke the surface and was hoisted over the deck, we saw it wasn't a school of anything. It was a single organism, and it was something that should not exist. It was tangled horribly in the high tensile net, a writhing mass of limbs and chitin. It looked vaguely like a crustacean, but it was the size of a pickup truck. Its shell was a mottled black and gray, like granite. The parts of it were strangely metallic, reflecting the deck lights with an oily sheen. It had at least 20 legs, jointed in ways that were mathematically impossible, some ending in delicate, feathery appendages, others in brutal, sickle-like claws. But the worst part was its head. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, armored plate. And from the center of that plate, a single, fleshy antenna, topped with a glowing purple orb, twitched and pulsed, casting its eerie light across our horrified faces. It was a biological contradiction, an evolutionary path that nature had wisely abandoned, and we had just dragged it screaming from a place it was never meant to leave. The thing thrashed on the deck, its too many legs scrabbling for purchase, its claws gouging deep furrows into the steel plates. The sound was horrifying, a high-pitched chittering mixed with a wet, bubbling hiss that came from vents along its body. But that wasn't what made a man named Gregor, a big Russian who had seen everything, start praying. As it moved, we saw that things were embedded in its shell, fused to it as if they had been absorbed. We saw a ship's bell with Cyrillic lettering, a tattered piece of a Russian flag, a rubber boot, and a human skull, its jaw locked in a silent scream. And then we saw the bodies. Not just one, but at least 4, horribly mangled and entwined with the creature's own anatomy. Their flesh was pale and rubbery, and they were still wearing the uniforms of the Volkov. The creature hadn't just attacked their ship, it had incorporated it and its crew into its very being. It was a living shipwreck, a biological ghost story, a predator that consumed and became its prey. The light from its antenna began to pulse faster, and a wave of nausea and vertigo washed over the crew. It was like the air itself was getting thick and heavy. I saw the deck plates ripple as if they were water. I looked at Riggs, and for a split second, his face was that of one of the dead Russians, his skin waterlogged and his eyes empty sockets. The chittering sound was in my head now, a chorus of alien thoughts and the dying screams of the Volkov crew. It wasn't just a physical threat, it was a psychic one. It was projecting its wrongness, its deep-sea madness into our minds, trying to break us. A young deckhand named Finn started screaming and clawing at his own eyes, shouting about the pressure in the dark. The creature was a weapon, and we were in its kill zone. The shared hallucination was that we were no longer on our ship, but deep below, being crushed and consumed in the absolute black. Riggs, to his credit, was the first to snap out of it. He bellowed an order that cut through the psychic static. "Cut it loose, send it back to hell." We couldn't possibly bring this thing to port. It was a monster that defied all known science, and it was actively driving us insane. We grabbed fire axes and cutting torches, a panicked, desperate mob trying to free the abomination from our nets so we could push it overboard. The creature fought back, its huge claws swiping wildly, one of them catching a winch and tearing it from its moorings with a scream of tortured metal. The air was filled with our shouts. Finn's continued screaming, and the creature's mind-bending chatter. I remember hacking at the thick, fibrous netting with an axe, the jarring impact traveling up my arms, the smell of ozone burning my lungs, all while fighting off visions of being drowned and dissolved in the abyssal dark. It was a battle for our ship and our sanity. We finally cut the last of the netting, and with the help of a deck crane, we managed to shove the monstrous thing over the side. It hit the water with a tremendous splash, and its violet light receded into the depths until it was just a pinbrick, and then nothing. The psychic pressure vanished instantly. We stood there on the ruined deck, gasping for breath, covered in its strange fluids. We never spoke of it again, not to each other, not to anyone. We reported a catastrophic gear failure and returned to port with a fraction of our expected catch. I quit the day we docked. I took a job in a warehouse as far from the coast as I could get. But sometimes, at night, when it's completely dark and quiet, I can still feel the pressure. I can feel the weight of all that water, and I know what lives under it. We talk about discovering new worlds in space, but there's a world of ancient, hungry things right here on Earth, waiting in the cold and the dark. And we are fools for ever disturbing them.
My name is Silas, and I've been fishing the waters off the coast of Maine for 47 years. I've seen my share of strange things, rogue waves that come from a placid sea, waterspouts that dance like devils on the horizon, the green flash of a dying sun. But none of it prepares you for the deep, dark truths the ocean keeps to itself. This happened on a solo trip, about 80 miles out, chasing a school of bluefin. The fog had rolled in thick as cotton batting, muffling the world until the only things that existed were my boat, the sea serpent, the gray water, and the perpetual chug of my diesel engine. For 2 days, that was my universe. The isolation starts to play tricks on you. You begin to hear whispers in the engine's drone and see faces in the cresting waves. It's a known phenomenon, a madness born of solitude and exhaustion. But what I experienced was something else entirely. It felt ancient, and it felt hungry. It started with the smell, a faint scent of jasmine and decay, a perfume that had no business being in the middle of the sterile, salty Atlantic. It was a sweet sickness on the air that clung to the back of my throat. The first body I saw was a woman, or at least I think it was. It was bobbing about 50 yards off my port bow, unnaturally still in the choppy water. She was pale, almost luminous, with long, dark hair that fanned around her head like a halo of black seaweed. I cut the engine, the sudden silence a shock to my system, and drifted closer. My heart was a cold lump of lead in my chest. You're supposed to report these things, call the Coast Guard, mark the coordinates. But something was wrong. Her skin was flawless, without the bloat or discoloration of a typical drowning victim. Her eyes were closed, and she had a faint, serene smile on her face, as if she were merely sleeping. As I got closer, a low humming sound started, a vibration I felt more in my teeth and bones than heard with my ears. The woman slowly, impossibly, turned in the water to face my boat, her smile never faltering. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to join her, a siren's call not of song, but of profound, silent peace. It was a promise of an end to all toil, a final rest in the cold embrace of the deep. It took every ounce of my willpower to slam the engine back to life and speed away, leaving her smiling in my wake. The fog didn't lift, and the humming never entirely went away. It became a constant companion, a background noise to my own ragged breathing. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her peaceful, inviting smile. The next day, I started seeing more of them. Dozens. Men, women, and what looked like children, all with that same pale skin and beatific expression, drifting just at the edge of the fog. They weren't corpses. They were invitations. My mind, frayed from lack of sleep, began to fracture. I started hearing a voice, a soft, feminine whisper that seemed to emanate from the hull of the boat itself. It spoke of a world beneath the waves, a city of quiet, dreamless sleep, where there was no pain, no loss, no memory. It knew my wife's name, Mary, who I'd lost to cancer 5 years prior. It promised I would see her again, that she was waiting for me, smiling just like the others. I found myself standing on the rail of my boat, staring down into the black water, the whisper coiling around me like a warm blanket. It was the shriek of the winch that broke the spell. I'd left my deep lines out, and something had taken the bait. Something massive. The winch was screaming, smoke pouring from the motor as it struggled to pull in the line. Forgetting the ghosts in the fog, my fisherman's instincts took over. This was a monster catch, the kind that could set me up for life. For nearly an hour, I thought it, the fiberglass of my boat groaning under the strain. I thought it had to be a record-breaking tuna or maybe a great white shark. But as I finally managed to haul it toward the surface, the fight just stopped. The line went slack, and I was left reeling in dead weight. When it brought the surface, I threw up over the side of the boat. It wasn't a fish. It was a pulsating, gelatinous sack of a creature, roughly the size of a man. It was semi-translucent, and inside its body I could see a swirling collection of things. Jewelry, buttons, a gold tooth, a small child's shoe. It was a collector. Entangled in the thin, sinewy tendrils that covered its body was the source of the humming, a larynx, a human voice box, swollen and glowing with a faint, pale light. The creature on my deck was the source of it all. The whispers, the hallucinations, the bodies. I realized with a dawning, soul-crushing horror that the figures in the water weren't apparitions. They were its previous meals, its lures. The creature pulsed weakly, and the whisper in my head intensified, a desperate, pleading symphony of promises. It showed me Mary's face, her eyes open and smiling, her hand reaching for me beneath the water. The smell of jasmine was overpowering now, coming directly from the creature. It was a biological trap, a predator that didn't use teeth or claws, but hope and despair. It hunted with memory. It was the most sophisticated and evil thing I had ever witnessed, a masterpiece of natural, nightmarish design. I knew in that moment that I couldn't bring this thing back to shore. It couldn't be studied. It could only be destroyed. The thought of this creature getting loose in a populated harbor, of what it could do with the grief and loss of a whole city, was a horror beyond comprehension. Armed with a gaff hook and my filleting knife, I began the grim work of pushing it back into the sea. It was surprisingly heavy, dense, and its tendrils seemed to cling to the deck. As I worked, the whispers turned to screams of psychic pain, images of my deepest fears and regrets flashing through my mind. It showed me the car crash that took my son, the moment the doctor told me about Mary's tumor, every failure and mistake of my life. It was a barrage of pure psychological warfare. I was crying, screaming, hacking at it, pushing its gelatinous mass toward the edge. The creature was fighting for its life not with physical strength, but by trying to break my spirit. It wanted me to give up, to lie down and let it consume my sorrow. But seeing my pain weaponized like that filled me with a righteous fury I didn't know I possessed. With a final desperate shove, the thing slid off the deck and back into the water with a sickening plop. The moment it submerged, the humming, the whispers, and the smell of jasmine vanished. The fog even seemed to thin. I cut my lines, abandoned my gear, and pointed the sea serpent home. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of Portland Harbor. I sold the boat and my license the next week. I never told anyone the real reason why. I just said the sea had taken too much from me. I still live by the water, but I never go near it. Sometimes when the fog rolls in thick and low, I can hear a faint humming on the wind, and I have to lock my doors and windows. I know what's out there in the deep, dark places of the world. It's not just fish, and it's not just sharks. There are things that feed more than flesh. There are things that hunt for souls, and they are very, very patient.